Right, we're going to change the brake pads on my Royal Enfield Bullet. Mine's a bit of a special bike, but this is the standard Bullet brake caliper that's fitted to the unit construction engine bikes, so it goes much the same on those. First thing I'm going to do is take these two caps off, these two dust caps, and it's easier done with them in place on the bike. They can be quite stiff. You sometimes need an impact driver or a bit of percussion to move them. That one's coming. It's just easier to do this. There we go. With the caliper attached to the bike, you get something to lever against. So those are really just a threaded dust cap with a slot in them. Take those off. And what I'm also going to do is just loosen slightly the pad pins, so they take an Allen key. I'm just going to crack those again because it's easier with the caliper still attached to the bike. There we go. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to undo the two bolts that hold the caliper to the fork leg. This is just my homemade mudguard stay. You may or may not have a mudguard stay in there, but the two bolts will be the same across all the models. Okay, one bolt. And two bolts. So those are out, and you should now be able to pull the caliper back off the disc. So that's the caliper back. I'm going to have a look at the pads, and yet they are getting awfully thin. You can see on this one there's a wear groove just here, and that's nearly gone. I'm calling these done. You can see the pistons are also a long way out, so I think, yeah, definitely time for these to be changed. So I'm going to leave the pistons sticking out for the moment and remove these pad pins. These are what hold the pad in place. When we're removing the pads, we need to be careful not to lose any little anti-rattle clips or shims that might be in holding the pads in position. They have a tendency to fall out, so we're going to keep a good eye on that, make sure we don't lose them. These pins can be bound up with dirt and muck. They can take a bit of pulling out sometimes. I'm not sure if this one, yeah, this one does have holes through the back, so they can be pushed through from behind, which is probably what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to use an Allen key. There's two holes here which correspond with the other side of those pad pins, so I should be able to push or knock them out. There we go. So I've now got something to get hold of. As I say, they've been in the bike for several thousand miles, getting splashed with mud and dirt and salt. Not sure I've got that one fully undone. Yes, I do. Sometimes you need a little drift and a hammer to get them all the way out. But okay, that's one of the brake pads that's fallen out. You can see we're very near the wear lines there. As I'll take these bits out now. So that's one fell out, and that's the other one. It's still binding on the pin slightly, but once I've got that out I'll be able to lever the pins through. No, it needs to go a bit further yet. I'm just going to pry this back slightly. Not an appropriate use of a screwdriver, but well, maybe it's not going to. There we go, we're not on the threads, so that's just, I'm not gripping this tightly, I'm just using it as a lever. That should let that pad out as well. So they're not completely worn out, but they're getting close. So I'm going to change them now. I'd like to get these pins all the way out. So they're in fairly tight. I may need to tap them through. So that's a good size. So what I'll be able to do now is just get a hammer and just tap these. See, that's pushing the pin out. That's our pin out. It doesn't look in particularly bad condition. There's just an accumulation of brake dust and road grunge stuck to that. I'll push the other one out too, so I'm going in that back hole there and tap with the hammer, and out it comes. So that's the other one. So they look in fairly good nick. You can see there's a lot of brake dust and general road grunge in here, so we're going to give that a clean out, making sure that the caliper does slide on its pins. You can see these pins move. That's how it takes up variations in brake pad thickness. And I do have an anti-rattle clip in here. There's an anti-rattle clip. You might not be able to see it very clearly because it's so dirty, but I'm just going to pry that out with a screwdriver. That's my anti-rattle clip. We'll give that a good clean up as well. So it's quite handy because the pistons are sitting out quite a long way, so we'll be able to give those a good clean before we push them back in. I'm just going to use a spray brake cleaner, high flash point solvent, and we're going to use a variety of brushes and paper towel just to get rid of this excess brake dirt, and you can see that's coming off there. I'll turn you off for a moment while I clean this up. Okay, so we've given that a good clean up now. The most useful tool I find for that is an old toothbrush. So we've cleaned all the brake residue off the outside of the pistons. I've also cleaned up the pad pins. They're a bit discoloured because the pad runs on this area, but there's no appreciable wear in it, so that's fine. And we've cleaned up the anti-rattle clip. So just removing the old brake residue. The next thing to do is we need to push the pistons back into the caliper. And a lot of them, if they're in good order, you'll be able to do this with by hand, which I can with this one. So I can just push those in. This one, not so much. There are special tools for pushing pistons back in with. I find if that's not going in by hand, a G-clamp usually works pretty well. I did have one right in front of me. So a G-clamp, and I think you can usually get that onto the onto the piston. It shouldn't take a huge amount of force to wind this in. It should go in quite readily. So you see, I'm not. It's just taking a little bit more than I could apply with my thumbs. So that's back in. Get the other one all the way in. There we go. So that's the pistons pushed back in now. We're ready for our anti-rattle clip, which serves to stop the brakes squealing when you're using them and holds the pads in position. So I'm just pushing that back in. Just clips into the base of the caliper like that. Now I need my new brake pads. There are various makes of brake pad. I like the brakes to work well on this. It's a bit souped up compared to normal bullets, so I like to use a Sinter brake pad, and I've managed to find Brembo SA pads in the correct size for this bike. They're cross-referenced off a different model that uses the same caliper. So I've got the part number there. It's 07YA21SA. SA brake pads cost about twice as much as normal brake pads, but I find that they're nearly twice as effective, so I like to use these. Want to be careful not to get oil and grease on the surface of the pads when we're fitting them. It might be interesting to just compare a new one with one of the old ones that we just took out. So in terms of wear, you can see we've used up quite a lot of the pad. When these grooves are gone, it's definitely time to change them. There's probably another couple of thousand miles left in them, but I'm going to do them now. So we'll have our two brake pads, and one of them has a hook on, and these holes are for the pad pins to slide through. So this one goes into the caliper, and this hook goes over this pin. So hook that over the pin and rotate it down into position. Like so. And the anti-rattle clips will hold this pad in position, and this is your moving pad here. This one moves in and out as the brakes are applied. So what we now need to do is put our pad pins back through. You need to be very careful. There's a lot of controversy about using lubrication on these sort of things. Some people will use a thin smear of copper grease. I'm just going to put some ceramic anti-seize compound, a very small amount, on these threads and the tip of the pin, which is nowhere near the brake pads themselves, and that's just where they have a tendency to bind up. So just a tiny amount. And we need to insert the pad pin so it goes through the caliper and through the holes in the brake pad. And you need to push against the spring pressure in the anti-rattle clip as you're doing that. And there we go, that one's in. I can let go of that now. We'll put our tiny dab of anti-seize compound on the other one. That's sufficient. And again, we'll push that through. It needs to go through the holes in the pads and then on into the caliper itself. So that's in. And oh, that's the wrong Allen key. That's the correct Allen key. We'll certainly get these started, if not screwed all the way home. Okay, that's in. And that's in. We'll tighten those up fully once it's back on the bike. So now we've got our two pads, and I need to make sure the moving pad is pushed back inside the caliper, so we have a gap, and we just slide that back on over the disc. And again, I'm going to use some of my anti-seize compound on the bolts that hold the caliper to the bike, because that's another place that does get corroded and stuck. Mine's a little bit fiddly because of this mudguard stay. We'll go right through the fork leg and screwing into the caliper. It's best to just start them off, don't tighten them fully down until they're both in. Okay, again, a small amount of anti-seize. And it takes a certain degree of wiggling to get them started. There we go, that's them both started now. So I'll be able to tighten them home. If you're not happy with how tight to make fasteners, this is certainly one of the places where it would be a good idea to use a torque wrench to get the tension in these bolts correct. You don't want these to come out, and you don't want to snap them in the caliper. So with experience you get quite a good feel for what's properly tight. They want to just stretch, but as I say, if you're uncertain, use a torque wrench. Okay, so those are tightened home. I'm going to do up my pad pins the rest of the way. Get them tightened in. And just nip them up. That's good. And now I'm going to replace my dust caps. There's already quite a lot of anti-seize in that hole from fitting the pad pins, so I'll just tighten these home. These don't need to be particularly tight, they just need to be snug enough that they're not going to fall out. They're really just there to protect the head of that Allen bolt and the threads, to prevent them becoming damaged with brake dust residue and corrosion. It's not unheard of to have to drill these out or remove them with an impact driver or a punch, because they can get well stuck. Those are in. Okay, next very important bit. If I was to ride away now, my front brake wouldn't work because I've pushed the pistons all the way in, so I need to squeeze the front brake several times until the pistons are pushed out against the pads and I have tension in the brake. Okay, so see, it would have taken me a good 6 or 7 squeezes of the brake lever to get effective brakes there. That's now got pressure at the brake. So that's my pads done. The only other thing I need to check is up at the handlebar level that their level of hydraulic fluid is correct. And we've changed the brake pads. Take some easy progressive braking. The first few times you use them, they do need to bed in against the disc. They will generate a lot of heat. So just give it some time to bed in. Don't expect them to work predictably. The first couple of times you use them, they can snatch, or they can be less effective than you thought they might be. So do some controlled braking under controlled circumstances the first few times, just so that you get a feel for them and make sure they're bedded in properly. And that's a brake pad fitted.